We're going to look today at Jupiter, which is in a stationary position, which means it's been going forward and now it's going to go back. And it's in the position of the crystal gazer Aries 9, which we spoke of quite recently. So I'll just remind us of that. A crystal gazer Aries 9, awakening the non-grasping, all-seeing, subtle aspect of mind. Focusing the subtle mind, being able to see the whole picture. The mature psychic can interpret scenes and scenarios in the holistic context. This perspective is not given to one lost in narcissistic self-love and obsessed with self-projection. Jupiter's movement forward and back and forward and back traces a very particular aspect of our life path. It is a lot simpler to understand cycles by studying Jupiter than the other planets because the slow ones are too slow to see the whole cycle. We have to infer, whereas the faster ones just can't be measured in terms of significant events quite as much. We may well enjoy a Venus transit or a Mars transit really clearly, but we won't really get the cycle of Mars because there are bigger and more powerful cycles at play. Whereas Jupiter has a very pleasing 12-year cycle, which means that given a period of awareness starting in the mid-20s, shall we say, and continuing indefinitely, we've got something like 4 or 5 cycles to study of Jupiter. Now, this is very helpful indeed for someone studying transits, and indeed the whole thing of transits and the particularity of what Jupiter transits mean for you, because we can look back at what happened last time it was here. What happened when Jupiter entered Aries? Well, we can look at that and we can see that cycle of 12 signs beginning then, and we can look at what happens bit by bit, stage by stage, Sabian degree by Sabian degree, and we can study the whole Sabian journey using Jupiter as our guide. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. We can also get a measure of what Jupiter means to us. It's different for each of us. There's a generic overarching understanding that, Jupiter is all about expansion and integration, isn't it? So growth in a way which is non-competitive. As we grow, we come up against something else and we just embrace it. We absorb things within us. We grow by taking in new things, which is different from Saturn, which requires us to exclude that which we don't want and contract. So Jupiter is very much to do with those things that help us to grow, such as traveling and studying and adventure and confidence and amassing. All of these Jupiter words are what helps us understand growth. Now, the way in which we grow changes quite a lot according to the sign Jupiter is passing through at the moment. And in Aries, especially now stationary in Aries, it's really emphasizing Aries energy. In the expression within Aries, the second expression from 6 to 10 degrees, called drive. Now, Jupiter in the expression of drive gives you a sense of real growth, real pushing forward. And yet, we remember that it's just about to go back again, to look again at where it has been before. The retrogradation process is to do with checking that you've got it right. None of us get things right first time. We don't. It's a trial and error kind of existence, isn't it? And this is true for the planets. They rush forward, in the case of Jupiter, really rushing very fast through the signs, up to the point where it turns retrograde. And then it goes back more slowly, it seems, checking out that its first appraisal of that degree works. He's at the same opinion that it wants to hold on to now. And it goes over old ground all the way back. And it's going retrograde until November. So we have a period now between today and November when the growth process is not fast moving into new arenas of consciousness. It's going back over what it sped through over the last few months, since actually October, when it was in Aquarius. It's going to look again at all these in order that when after November it starts to go forward again, its reappraisal of each of the Sabian degrees is based on a very firm understanding, a deeper understanding. It's had a first look, and then it's gone over and had another look with a lot of hindsight. You'll notice that the Sabian symbols can be stacked on one another. In other words, a certain degree helps you understand the next degree. And this is better understood in what I've called the Sabian life journey on my website. You might want to look at it, where you can understand a sign a little bit better in context by looking at the previous degree. Any Sabian symbol is better understood in its sign and its degree by looking at the previous one, so we can see the unfolding of a story. Now, the story that Jupiter is telling is that which we must discover for ourselves. It's different for all of us. How are we able to grow? How are we able to integrate? How do we go about that differently from everyone else? And you'll learn this by, of course, looking at your Jupiter position in your horoscope and what aspects it's making, what house it's in, and so on. You can also get a really profound insight by studying the transits of Jupiter. So Jupiter itself re-emerges into a new cycle of evolution. It continues to grow. It is the principle of growth. Jupiter itself is growing. It is not only helping us to grow, in itself it is growthful. So it is growing. Everything living is growing. And these planets are living consciousnesses. So Jupiter is evolving all of the time. And every time it goes into the first degree of Aries, it starts off a new phase of that. And those of us who are sensitive and looking can feel that. So you might want to check out what happened in your life when Jupiter entered Aries. This was the first half of May, just a few weeks ago, really. Maybe something happened then that was sparking a new 12-year plan for you in some way. And you could look back a further 12 years to June 2010, when it did the same thing. And then you start to get a resonance. You can see that certain events that don't seem connected are connected when you understand Jupiter's principle. So in my case, I've studied this and I found that Jupiter is mainly about moving from one dimension of teaching to another. I'm kind of, as a teacher, I'm moving forward and teaching on a deeper level perhaps, and that is renewed every 12 years. But the first Jupiter transit that let me know this was not about teaching at all. It was about clearing the way so I could become a teacher. In other words, it was about not continuing what I was doing previously. That was the big deal. I claimed my freedom by changing my domestic situation, my working situation, so that I could then become a teacher. So if you're a bit imaginative and you try and understand what Jupiter is teaching you, you'll find what it means for you, the cycle of Jupiter. This could be true of any of the planets, but it's a lot easier to study with Jupiter because you can see 12-year cycles, and you can see the oppositions and the squares also within those 12-year cycles, and that'll give you another little reminder of the topic of your Jupiter. So then, knowing that for me it's teaching, I have a aspect with Uranus, it's in the 3rd house, it's going to be about teaching, but for you it would be something completely different depending on your house position and aspects. So once you've understood what Jupiter represents for you, then you can study it much, much more meaningfully. Also, you can look at your Jupiter returns. In other words, Jupiter going into Aries for the 1st degree of Aries starts a cycle, but there's another cycle, a Jupiter return, where it just returns to where it was when you were born. And that will give you another sense of what Jupiter is for you. Now, when Jupiter entered Aries in May of this year, it was 12 years after, well, a 12-year cycle, it wasn't exactly 12 years, but the last time it entered Aries, it was conjunct Uranus. You think about that. Uranus entering Aries at the same time that Jupiter entered Aries. That's a very unusual transit. It's unusual because Jupiter and Uranus are relatively slow-moving planets, so they're not in conjunction that often. You know, something like 12-year cycle for Jupiter, during which time Uranus would have moved around at least one sign. So you're talking about 13, 14-year cycles between Jupiter and Uranus. Not that often, but this particular one coincided with the 1st degree of Aries. That's a special point. That's emergence into another dimension of consciousness. So if you can actually try and remember and work out retrospectively what changed in a big way for you, in a Jupiter kind of way, around June 2010, all of a sudden Uranus energy, and it changed your perception, it changed your opportunity, it changed your energy levels. All of a sudden, something happened in June 2010. If you can work that out for yourself, then you come forward. You will see, if you look and you're perceptive, that there would have been an echo of that in May, when once again Jupiter entered the 1st degree of Aries. And it would be to do with emergence, because that's the Sabian symbol of that degree. In other words, that which really emerged for the first time ever into your consciousness in 2010, in June, had another emergence in May, a few weeks ago, in some way. And it's for you to work out what that was. Emergence means something is now disclosed that was previously hidden. It was there, but now you can see it. It emerges into the light of consciousness. Now, that's the story that we're telling of Jupiter, and it's come forward to the 9th degree of Aries, the crystal gazer, and it's stopped. The crystal gazer is all about awakening intuition. So Jupiter is saying, I wonder what to do next. I wonder what all this is about. It's contemplating its experiences and the wisdom that it wants to take from them. So in your particular life now, that path that you're on, which is a growthful path, not necessarily spiritual, it's up to you, but it's growthful. It makes you more than you were before. And it's a 12-year cycle. That kind of career ambition, for example, or family development, for example, or increasing your wealth, or whatever, that kind of longer term cycle and you only get 4 or 5 of them in a lifetime that you know about. This is what we're discussing here. And the crystal gazer is saying, like, work this out on an inner level now. You need to consult your inner oracle, your intuition, your sense of what's going on. In other words, there's a course direction that needs to shift now. You're probably going in the wrong direction a little bit, or at least you're not optimizing your opportunities because you're just not tuning in enough, using this crystal ball method of deepening your involvement with your intuition. With that insight, you're going back now all the way to November, a good few months, having a look again at what you previously maybe only half understood. Each of the Sabian degrees will reveal themselves to you more clearly in this retrogradation phase, such that when in November you go forward again, you'll really start to use them for your growthful purposes. Entering Aries again, having another look at that first degrees of Aries, the emergence principle, and then moving on into a whole different way of seeing the Aries cycle. So Jupiter in drive, in the expression of drive, in the 9th degree of Aries, this is a time for you to pause. Do not push forward with force, but contemplate what's actually going on, and be aware that that contemplative moment is extended for a duration, and that'll take you right up until mid-autumn. So stop pushing, start feeling what the results of your previous pushing have been. I would say that's the message here.